I'm Sarah, author, fiber, speaker, and clarity coach. Welcome to my Jesus bubble. I teach survivors of betrayal trauma and post-separation abuse how to get safe, stable, and strong. Today, I'm here to share a gentle, quiet moment with you that's good for your soul. We've been reading through the book, Hinds Feet on High Places. It's an allegory of a weary and aging journey with story woman named Afraid as she struggled through her journey of sorrow and suffering. Fear becomes lives with you. So if you're following along, and at the end of this, I will drop my link for just an Amazon link for this book in case you want to grab it and follow along. It's called Hinds Feet on High Places by Hannah Hurnard. And we are reading starting from page 9. This is episode 3. Read. She's just been talking to the shepherd. Quiet place by a pool of water under the shadow of the mountain. And he has planted the seed of love in her heart. Then, as the sun had already gone down in a blaze of red and gold, and the eastern mountains were now veiled in misty mauve and gray, and the shadows were lengthening, he turned and led his flock away toward the sheepfold. Much afraid, turned her face homeward, her heart full of happiness and excitement, and still feeling as though she would never be frightened again. As she started back across the fields, she sang to herself one of the songs from an old book of songs which the shepherds often used. Never before had it seemed to her so sweet, so applicable. She walked singing across the first field and was halfway over the next when suddenly she saw Craven Fear himself coming toward her. Now remember, this is the cousin that her relatives had decided she must marry. Or Much Afraid. For a little while, she had completely forgotten the existence of her dreadful relatives, and now here was the most dreaded and detested of all of them, slouching toward her, her heart filled with a terrible panic. She looked left and right, but there was no hiding place anywhere. And besides, it was all too obvious that he was actually coming to meet her, for as soon as he saw her, he quickened his pace and in a moment or two was right beside her. Have you ever felt that way? With someone who's been harmful or abusive to you? You have this moment of excitement and happiness, and you feel strong for a split second. And then they show up. And all of a sudden, what are you supposed to do? And you are right back there having a panic attack, an anxiety attack, feeling so incredibly fearful. And it feels like it is out of your control. With a horror that sickened her very heart, she heard him say, "Well, here you are at last, little cousin Much Afraid. So we are to be married, eh? What do you think of that?" And he pinched her, presumably a playful manner, but viciously enough to make her gasp and bite her lips to keep back a cry of pain. She shrank away from him and shook with terror and loathing. Unfortunately, this was the worst thing she could have done, for it was always her obvious fear which encouraged him to continue tormenting her. If only she could have ignored him, he soon would have tired of teasing her and of her company and would have wandered off to look for other prey. In all her life, however, Much Afraid had never been able to ignore fear. Now it was absolutely beyond her power to conceal the dread which she felt. Her white face and her terrified eyes immediately had the effect of making him desire to bait her more. Here she was, alone and completely in his power. He caught hold of her, and poor Much Afraid uttered one frenzied cry of terror. And at that moment, Craven Fear loosed his grasp and cringed away. The shepherd had approached them, unperceived, and was standing beside them. One look at his stern face and flashing eyes, and the stout shepherd's cudgel grasped in his strong uplifted hand was more than enough for the bully. Craven Fear slunk away like a whipped cur, actually running from the village instead of toward it, not knowing where he was going, urged by one instinct alone, to find a place of safety away from the shepherd. Much Afraid burst into tears. Of course, she ought to have known that Craven was a coward, and that if only she had lifted her voice and called for the shepherd, Craven would have fled at once. Now her dress was torn and disordered, and her arms bruised by the bully's grip. Yet that was the least part of her distress. She was overwhelmed with shame that she had so quickly acted like her old name and nature, which she had hoped was beginning to change already. It seemed so impossible to ignore the feelings, and still less to resist them. She did not dare look at the shepherd, but had she done so, she would have seen with what compassion he was regarding. She did not realize that the Prince of Love is of very tender compassion to them who are afraid. She supposed that, like everybody else, he was just despising her for her silly fears, so she muttered an ashamed, "Thank you." Then, still without looking at him, she limped painfully toward the village, weeping bitterly as she went and saying over and over again to herself, "What is the use of even thinking of going to the high places? I could never reach them, for the least little thing is enough to turn me back." However, when at last she reached the security of the cottage, she began to feel better, and by the time she had drunk a cup of tea and taken her evening meal, she had recovered so far that she was able to remind herself of all that had happened there beside the cascade and the pool. Suddenly she remembered, with a thrill of wonder and delight, that the seed of love had been planted in her heart. As she thought of it, the same almost intolerable sweetness stole over her, the bittersweet, indefinable, but wholly delightful ecstasy of a new happiness. "It is happy to love," said little Much Afraid to herself, and then she repeated, "It is happy to love," after putting the cottage in order for the night, because she was utterly tired out with all the conflicting emotions of that strange day. She went to bed. Lying there, before falling asleep, she sang over and over again to herself another of the lovely songs from the old songbook. And the words were, "O thou whom my soul loveth, tell me where thou dost feed, and where thy flocks at noonday to rest and browse dost lead. For why should I by other be, and not by thee? O fairest among women, dost thou indeed not know that then lead my little flocklet the way that my flocks go, and be to me as I to thee, sweet." Then she fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. Should we go into chapter 2 right now? Let's do it. Chapter 2, The Fearing Invasion. Much Afraid woke early the next morning, and all her fears were gone. Her first thought was, probably sometime today I am to start for the high places with the shepherd. This so excited her that she could hardly eat her breakfast. As she began making arrangements for her departure, she could not help thinking. It seemed to her that ever since the seed of love had been planted in her heart, songs of joy were welling up in her innermost being. And the songs which best expressed this new happiness and thankfulness were from the old book which the shepherds so loved to use as they worked among the flocks and led them to the pastures. As she carried out the simple arrangements the shepherd had told her to make, she sang another of these songs. "Now when the king at table sits, my spikenard smelleth sweet, and myrrh and camphire from my store I pour on his feet. My thankful love must be displayed. He loved and wooed a beggar maid, ye daughters of Jerusalem. I'm black to look upon as goatskin tents, but also as the tent of Solomon. Without, I bear the marks of sin, but love's adorning is within. Despise me not, that I am black. The sun hath burned my face. My mother's children hated me and drove me from my place. In their vineyards I toiled and wept, but mine own vineyard have not kept. I am not fair, save to the king, though fair my royal dress. His kingly grace is lavished on my need and worthlessness. My blemishes he will not see, but loves the beauty that shall be. Canticles, chapter 1, verses 12 through 15, and 5 and 6. From time to time, as she went about her work, her heart fluttered, half with excitement, half with the dread of the unknown. But whenever she remembered the thorn in her heart, she tinkled from head to foot with that same mysterious sweetness. Love was for her, too, even for her, crippled little Much Afraid. When she reached the high places, he was to lose her humiliating disfigurements and be made beautiful. And when the plant in her heart was ready to bloom, she was to be loved in return. Even as she thought of this, doubt mingled with the sweetness. Surely it could not possibly be true, just a beautiful dream, but not reality. Oh, I'm afraid it won't ever happen, she would say to herself. And then, when she thought of the shepherd, her heart beat faster again, and she would run to the door or the window to see if he were coming to call her. The morning wore on, and still he had not come. But just after midday, something else came. An invasion by her terrible relatives. All of a sudden, before she realized what was happening, they were upon her. There was tramping of feet and a clamor of voices, and then she was surrounded by a whole army of aunts and uncles and cousins. Craven, however, was not with them. The family, hearing of his reception the evening before and realizing that she shrank from him with peculiar dread and terror, had decided it would not be wise to take him with them. They were determined to overrule Much Afraid's objections to the marriage, and if possible, get her out of the cottage and into one of their own dwelling places. Their plan was to make a bold attack, while she would be alone in the cottage and the shepherd far away with his flocks, so they hoped she would be at their mercy. She could not be forcibly abducted in daylight. There were too many of the shepherd's servants in the village who would instantly come to her assistance. However, they knew Much Afraid's timidity and weakness, and they believed that if there were enough of them present, they could cow her into consenting to go with them to the mansion of old Lord Fury. Then they would have her in their power. The old lord himself was actually with them, assuring her in a fatherly tone of voice that they had come with the kindest and friendliest of intentions. He understood that she had some objections to the proposed marriage, and he wanted to have the opportunity of quietly talking them over with her to see if he could set them at rest. It seemed to him that it was a suitable and attractive match in every way, and there must be some extraordinary misconception in her mind in which a little understanding talk together would set right. You know what we call people like this? Flying monkeys. People who do the bidding or further the interests of the abusive person. If not, Lord Fearing assured her kindly, he would not permit her to be married against her will. So he's also deceptive and manipulative, isn't he? When he had finished, a babble of other fearing voices broke in, reasoning with her and making all sorts of suggestions. The fact was, they told her, that she had cut herself off from her relatives for too long, and it was now quite apparent that she had all kinds of strange notions about their feelings and intentions toward her. This is what we call gaslighting. It was really only right that she should now spend a little time with them and thus give them the opportunity of proving that she had misunderstood and misjudged them. Craven might not be just as handsome and pleasing in appearance as a prince in fairy tale, and it was true that he had, unfortunately, a rather rough manner, but that was because he had known nothing of the softening and refining influences of marriage. Oh, so they also have woefully misconceived perceptions that it is the woman's work to refine and influence the man to become a decent human being in a marriage. Interesting, isn't it? Certainly, the responsibilities and joys of married life would quickly alter this, and would indeed effect a transformation in him. It was to be her delightful privilege to assist as principal mover in bringing about this reformation, which they all so eagerly wished to see. So they're placing all the burden of improving him into a decent human on her. We've never heard that before, right? The whole gang talked on and on, while poor Much Afraid sat cowering in their midst, almost too dazed to know what they were saying and suggesting. So, just as they had hoped, they were gradually bringing her to a state of bewilderment and incoherent fear. This is called a freeze response when we talk about trauma response. It looked as though they would soon be able to persuade her that it was her duty to attempt the impossible task of trying to convert craven fear into something less objectionable than he really was. Suddenly, there came an interruption from without. The Fearings had carefully closed the door when they entered the cottage and even contrived to bolt it so that Much Afraid could not escape. Now came the distant sound of a man's voice raised in song, singing one of the songs from the old book, which Much Afraid knew and loved so well. And then the singer himself came into view, slowly passing along the way. It was the chief shepherd, already leading his flock to the watering place. The words floated in through the open window, accompanied by the soft bleating of the sheep and the little scuffling of many dusty, tiny feet as they pattered after him. It seemed as though all other sounds were hushed to stillness on that quiet summer afternoon as the shepherd sang while passing the cottage. Inside, the clamor of voices had ceased instantly and was succeeded by silence which could be felt. This is what he sang. The voice of my beloved. Through all my heart it thrills. He leaps upon the mountains and skips upon the hills, for like a roe or a young hart, so swift and strong is he. He looks through my window and beckons unto me. Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away with me. Gone are the snows of winter, the rains no more we see. The flowers are appearing, the little birds all sing. The turtle dove is calling through all the land, 'tis spring. The shoots are on the grapevines and the figs are on the tree. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away with me. Why is my dove still hiding when all things else rejoice? Oh, come, let me see thee, fair one. Oh, let me hear thy voice. From Canticle 2:8-14. As she sat, listening in the cottage, Much Afraid knew with a pang of agonizing pain that the shepherd was calling her to go with him to the mountains. This was the secret signal he had promised, and he had said that she must be ready to leave instantly the moment she heard it. Now here she was, locked inside her own cottage, beleaguered by her terrible fears, and unable to respond in any way, to give any sign of her need or to respond to his call. There was one moment indeed when the song first started, everyone was startled into silence, when she might have called him to come and help her. She did not realize that the Fearings were holding their breath lest she did call, and had she done so, they would have fled helter-skelter through the door. However, she was too stunned with fear to seize the opportunity. And then it was too late. We'll stop there for this time. But I have a question for you. What fear keeps you from moving forward when God asks? What are the fears that keep you frozen in place? Even when you are called to do something beautiful, something better, something without fear, something of courage, something for your own health and well-being and your good? What are the fears that keep you frozen? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you have loved this story, you're welcome to go catch up on the other ones if you missed them. But definitely send it to a friend. Share this with someone who needs encouragement on their journey of walking through fear. Tag a friend in the comments underneath. And if you're stumbling through the next steps for healing after abuse, come join my live coaching club. We meet once a month. super affordable. And the link is down in my comments. It's called The Scoop. And it's a wonderful place to support each other as you overcome. I'll see you tomorrow.